Over here. Yeah, good.
It's on
everything. Yep.
All right.
So cool.
So this is a podcast.
Yeah, first podcast.
First podcast.
So how do we know when it starts?
It's starting already.
It started right
has
now.
it?
It has started.
So who are you?
I'm Casey McDonough, and I'm one of the people working to Save the Theater, I guess.
Oh, cool. That's weird.
Do you know about the theater, the Utah Pantages
I think I've
Theater?
heard of it once or twice. So yeah, I'm Michael, and also working to Save the Theater,
Yep.
Casey. So I'll let you take
it.
over,
All
take
right.
host. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the first podcast, and we were going to get some history from my family's perspective. These are my parents, Greg and Karel, and
With a K.
Karel with a K.
Greg with a G.
Greg with a G, not with a K. And Michael likes to say that we're the first family of the Pantages.
The royal first family.
The royal first family of the Pantages.
Yeah.
And maybe it's only because, as time goes on, we keep finding more people with great stories, but I grew up hearing stories all the time about the Pantages, about movies in Utah. And so we're going to kind of get a little bit of my family's history in the theater from both sides. My dad was raised in Taylorsville. My mom up in the Rupert Burley area of Idaho, but even she had connections as a child with the Utah Pantages. And so let's start with my mom.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell us, when's your first recollection, of the Utah Pantages?
Well, my mother lived in Salt Lake from about 1909 to 1917 as a teenager. And it was during vaudeville times, so she remembered going to the Pantages and seeing people like Bob Hope and Amos and Andy, and she'd talk about having the spelling bee. And whenever she'd talk about the Pantages, about the theater, the vaudeville, she would always say, and there were these fire hose holders on either side of the stage, and they said Pantages Theater, and she always did the sweep with her arm of those fire hose holders. And then she would talk about the horrendous fires that they had earlier in the century in theaters because of the lights, and the footlights would be real candles, and she'd say they had to have the fire hoses so that in case they had a fire start. So later on, that just always sounded so wonderful to me because all we had was little movie theaters in Rupert. Later on, we went, when they closed the Utah Theater, Greg said, let's go down and see if we can tour and see what's down there. So we went down, and the man showed us down in the basement and showed us the dressing rooms, and there were these enormous, thick marble counters in those dressing rooms. And there sitting on the floor were those fire hose holders that said Pantages Theater. And I said, well, what are they going to do with those? And he says, well, I don't know. Do you want to buy them? And I said, well, okay, how much you want? He said, $20 a piece, and there were 4 of them. I said, well, I'll take them all. And he said, well, I don't want to sell them all. I want to keep one. Now, thinking back, he was the manager. He probably didn't have the right to sell them in the beginning. But they have sat in my basement now for 40 years.
Wow.
So when this all came up, I remembered those fire hose holders, and I thought, that's really neat. I have them. So one time we went down and toured and went through the theater, and I could see on the walls the scars where those fire hose holders had sat on either side of the stage. So that, and then when Greg and I met, he talked about his family being involved with the Pantages. I remembered those stories that my mother told me.
That's incredible.
Nice. Well, and that keys right into Dad's experience, because, Greg's experience. It's hard for me not to say Mom and Dad here.
My dad was in the motion picture business. He worked for RKO, worked for Paramount. His older brother, Frank, was the branch manager of Paramount, and their father was the stage manager for the Pantages Theater. And my mother used to say that she would go with her mother-in-law, my grandma, and they'd go into Keeley's, which is just south of the theater entrance. Now you showed it the other day, but they'd buy a pound of chocolates and go in and watch the show and eat a pound of chocolates. And then during those days, it was when I first grew up, it was wartime, but we had a film pass because that's just the way the business worked. And Film Row, which was on First South between 2nd East and 3rd East, is where all the different film companies were. There was Paramount, Allied, Fox, RKO. MGM was around the corner, and they would bring the films in from the theater and rewind them and fix any breaks in them and so forth. And they had these octagon cans, and they'd label them up to ship to the next theater. And they didn't have UPS. What they had is Railway Express.
Yeah.
And so they'd take those over to the train stations and put them on the train, and it'd take the films wherever they were going to go. But my grandpa, because he was the stage manager, Uncle Frank became the branch manager of Paramount Pictures. Louis Marcus, who was a mayor in Salt Lake, owned Intermountain Pictures,
Okay.
which he had like 15 theaters up and down the Wasatch Front. And then my dad worked for RKO. I remember during the war we moved to Billings, Montana because gas rationing. So they moved him up there because he had to go visit every little theater to book and sell motion picture things. So we were up there for a year until after the war, I guess, and then came back. And my cousin Richard, who was a little older than me, but they had a screening room in the Paramount Theater, which is now a furniture store.
Yeah.
And his birthday parties, they'd have cake and we'd watch a movie, you know, so it was really cool. But so that's basically where I've been, you know, and as a kid, I went to it wasn't the Pantages then, I went to the Utah Theater, the Lyric Theater, which the church left the front on, but there was the Rialto, the State.
There were theaters everywhere.
There were theaters everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was Southeast, there was the Marlowe. There used to be a theater over on the corner of 13th South and 5th East. There were lots of theaters.
Yeah, what was the photo we came across? So the Utah Theater had 2 screens, and there was the 3rd screen across the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, later on they split the Utah Theater, which was stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was the Utah 1 and 2, as they called them, and then sometimes they also called it like the Penthouse and something else. And then across the street, they said it was the Utah 3.
In the Bamberger building, one of those buildings
which
there?
I just barely found out was even there. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So it's like learning for 2 years. I still learn more
I
theater.
sent you guys a spreadsheet on Excel that had all the theaters and when they were established and who was the manager and what their address was in the year.
Yeah, that's so cool. When I first started doing this, there's a great website, Cinema Treasures, that has so many old theaters on there. And I remember finding like a website, and it just had like 200 theaters that were in Utah that are like gone now.
Yeah.
So like I'd love to dive more into that, and you know.
Well, there was a drive-in theater up above the zoo.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of it, but
When Kelly was working, our oldest son, Kelly, worked at Arbax. And he was supposed to fold boxes for Christmas to wrap gifts.
Yeah.
And they would send him over to the Liberty basement. And we never knew what that was. And when Greg was doing this, the Liberty Theater was just west of Arbax on that street.
Right.
So they called it the Liberty basement from that.
Yeah,
Because it was Liberty
So
Theater.
Arbax used to have like a big department store, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like in the corner, and then like we found out too, like those stores that are in front of where the Pantages is, and those were all Arbax stores as well. Like they like go back to the 1870s, so like even older.
The front part.
The front part, like where Twisted Roots and Ray's Barbershop and all those stores are right now. So. Pretty crazy.
What's the so there's another, we have some artifacts, right? And it's interesting you commented on the fire hose holders. They've probably seen the light of day more in the last 2 years than they did in the last 40.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've been hauling around
But
to
we
like
also
meetings.
have that lamp.
Yeah, so there's a lamp too. Tell us the story of the lamp.
When Greg and I were first married, his Uncle Myron's widow just lived a block from here. And we went up to see her. And she said she had some things from the Pantages, that he had been working there when they turned the Pantages into the Utah and made it into a movie house. And she said they all went down, they invited all the employees to bring their families down to get stuff out of there. And she said that they brought home many, many yards of sheeting that had been used as backdrops. And she washed it and made sheets and never had to make sheets again because there was so much.
Yeah.
And then she said, and she's on the entrance in that long hall in the foyer, there were alcoves with a chair and a lamp in each of the alcoves. And she had brought home one of those lamps. And she said, "Do you want it?" And, well, yeah, I want it. And so she brought it out, and she said, "You may as well take this too." It was an extra piece of glass out of the lamp. And we brought it home, and we were living in the apartment, and I had it sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and Casey's big brother Kelly came storming down the stairs one time and knocked it over and broke one of the pieces of glass, and I thought, oh good, I've got an extra piece. And so
Yeah.
I had that for it. But that has sat in the basement for 40 years too.
It seemed
Yeah.
it's
And
been the
then-
light of day.
That lamp is incredible. Like
Then
those alcoves.
Greg got it out and fixed it and painted it and got it everything, and then he found out it's a Haydn. All those lamp, and that's a well
Like a famous
sought
lamp
after
maker?
famous
Yeah,
lamp. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's good to have, like, when it's restored,
Right.
and we put lamps back in all those alcoves, we have a representation.
Yeah,
we can have
yeah.
that company make replicas.
Yeah.
And
Well, it goes to show too, like Pantages when he built it, you know, using top-notch everything.
Well,
those Alaska
I was
marble floors,
looking at
Tiffany
those
skylights.
pictures out of the Tacoma, the Toronto one,
Yeah.
and I saw bird's eye maple staircase.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from the house, I know that you don't find bird's eye maple anymore.
Well, in the Utah Theater, the banisters are marble, as I
Yeah,
recall.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
There's so much stonework in there.
Yeah, yeah. What's funny about the making the sheets out of drapes, it's like I saw something recently too, which was an old company in the 30s during the Depression. They'd have just bags of like flour, right, and cloth, and they'd found out like women were taking the cloth, making dresses out of them for
Oh, yeah.
girls and stuff. So they started putting like decorations on the cloth in different patterns, so like they could
The
make them
flour
into
mill
dresses.
started.
Yeah,
well,
I saw that just the other day.
I
That's
had
so cool.
dresses made out of those flour sacks. I remember that. But the story in my home about those sacks was my sister said, "Mama, I don't care if you make my dresses out of the flour sacks and make my underwear out of them. Just make sure that my panties don't say flour."
That's funny. Yeah, it's like people, I think younger people forget that, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, the other
you just
thing-
didn't go to the store and buy clothes and stuff
Right.
all
When-
the time.
The plaster work in the Pantages Utah Theater.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember when Palmer DePaulis was mayor, they redid the city and county building.
Right.
And the people that redid the plaster work in it wasn't really as intricate as what the Utah Theater is,
Yeah.
or the
Yeah, yeah.
Pantages.
Yeah.
But the guys that started out as apprentices were the masters when they got through doing that. Karel and I were in Grand Rapids, and they had a city and county building similar to ours that they tore down, and they had part of it in the Van Andel Museum. And they all were crying that they tore that down instead of restoring it.
Yep.
Yeah.
When they made the Capitol Theater and refurbished that, I thought they got the wrong theater. They should have done. They should have done the Utah
We were
Theater.
just talking about that the other day because like they put in $33 million to the Capitol in like just 2019, 2 years ago, and we're like, man, $33 million to the Pantages. That's almost a full restoration
Oh, yeah.
right there.
Well, it's interesting. Like I keep asking the question. They could have made a conclusion that was too much,
Yeah.
that it's not worth it. That
Right.
regardless of the history, regardless of the architecture,
Yeah.
they could have gotten a developer surely to come in and tear the theater down and build a tower,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But no one would ask that question of
Right.
the Capitol Theater.
See, that's what's so funny is like the Capitol's so beloved, and then they're literally right next door
Yeah.
to each other. Their walls are
They're holding
touching.
hands.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
holding. I like that. They're,
They're
holding
holding
hands.
hands.
It's the Pantages, and yet here we are trying to fight for 2 years to
Yeah.
protect
Well,
it. And,
right at the time when they were, after they said they bought the Pantages Utah Theater and were going to restore it.
Right.
Yep.
Eccles donated the money to build the Eccles Theater across the street, and
Right.
it's a nice modern theater for New York and everything.
Yeah.
But it's not
Yeah.
the
It's- yeah.
Pantages.
Yeah, what's wild too is like we talked about the plaster and paint. We've been in deep talks with our sister theater in Tacoma, and what all their plaster work and all their paint, was only like $1 million, and
Yeah.
$1 million and change. So, like, and most of the work the Utah Pantages needs is, it obviously needs new seismic upgrades and things like that. It needs the metal part removed, and we have to get in there and rebuild the sky boxes and seats like that. But most of it, and then it needs new chairs and stuff. But most of it's plaster and paint work.
Yeah.
That's the vast majority of it. It just needs that plaster work redone, that paint redone.
But the
And-
stonework and the plaster cannot be replaced.
Well, it's interesting too. Like when you make that comment, that's specific to the auditorium.
Right.
The vast majority of that hallway
Yeah,
and
it's-
that main lobby is
Right.
there.
There's the alcoves that need some work
There,
done.
I would say there's probably better than 90%,
Right.
maybe 95% of that stuff
Yeah.
there.
Well, it's funny too. They always talk about it's so dilapidated and unsafe, but it's
Yeah.
like people could totally go. You know, it's two separate buildings. Like
Mhm.
we were talking about with the Arbeck stores in the front. Like people could totally go right through the hallway up to
Yep.
the lobby, and it's all. It's. I would imagine it's pretty much safe up to that point until you get into the theater part, which is a different story with the seismic upgrades and things. But
Well, it's been 4 or 5, probably been 10 years since we toured that last
It's-
time.
It was 2010, that last open house.
yeah, I
So
can't
when
remember
we
when I
went,
went. I
so
feel
it's
like I
been
went
10 years?
2011.
11
I gotta
years.
find my
10, something like
photos.
that. And I remember going with you guys, with you guys in there, and we crossed paths with Spencer Eccles and his wife.
Yes,
Do you remember that?
we did.
Oh, that's right.
And I tell
talked
that
with
story
him.
because it just, I keep telling it because I think it highlights that's why there's a relevance different than a lot of other things in a theater, because it's a place where everybody went to get
Right,
the
right.
news of the
The
war.
great equalizer.
The great equalizer, right? We
Yeah.
all go to the same movies. We all
Sit in
we
the
all go to
same
the same
seats, yeah.
seats, yeah.
But
And
the
so
but what I refer to downtown it comes from my experience as a school teacher,
Yeah.
referring to emotional climate.
yeah.
Yeah.
The emotional climate of that theater cannot be replaced.
Right.
The feeling you have when you're in there.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
some people refer to that as the ghosts, and maybe there's ghosts in there. I don't
Yeah.
even care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know the emotional climate of our house,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
restoration of old buildings.
Right.
There's something that happens when you're in there, a feeling
Yeah.
that once the building's gone, you
Yeah.
cannot get that feeling back.
Yeah, I mentioned that the other day too. Like even if we tore it down and we rebuilt it exactly the way that Pantages built it today, it still wouldn't be the same, right? Because it's all that history,
Yeah,
that
that's
emotional,
right.
all that cultural and artistical.
but the
things.
financial end of that is we couldn't afford to do the
Yeah.
stonework and the plastic.
Yeah.
I've got a family photo of on the back side, on it'd be West Temple,
Mm-hmm.
of Amos and Andy in a car
Yeah.
as part of the advertising to tell people Amos and Andy were in town.
Was that vaudeville, Amos and Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
They
And,
also had a radio show.
That's what I thought. They had
Yeah.
radio as well.
but they did vaudeville too. I
Yeah,
mean,
Yeah.
we had Yankee Doodle Dandy, James,
James Cagney,
Cohan.
okay, George M. Cohan.
I mean, he played there. I mean,
Yeah.
Bob Hope played there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I talked to Van Somerville about the Pantages recently. He was the gentleman that saved the Egyptian theater up in Ogden, and
Mhm.
he was so thankful that we were, fighting to save it.
Yeah.
But he was mentioning that they used to do broadcast shows out of there, and I think he mentioned like, I just forgot the
It was a
name.
radio show.
Yeah, yeah.
Like they would produce radio shows out of the theater.
Yeah,
is what
yeah.
you're saying.
It was like who's the two guys? I just forgot the name.
Is it the one we talk about a lot?
No, it's Dean Martin and Lewis.
Martin and
He
Lewis.
said Martin Lewis did a show out
Oh,
of
that'd
there.
be cool.
I totally forgot Martin
Yeah, yeah.
Lewis.
and another point, my family, my other grandfather on my mother's side, they grew up in Ephraim, and he was an entrepreneur. He put in the sidewalks and the water system and the electricity in Ephraim, Preston, Idaho, and so forth. And he and his brother-in-law had a flour mill,
Yeah.
and his brother-in-law died, and so they sold everything, and he moved to Salt Lake in 1916.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
and he wanted to buy Wandamere Park. And Wandamere Park had a velodrome where they raced motorcycles. It had a floating stage, and it's Nibley Park.
Okay.
And Grandpa was always in charge of the activities when they'd have the 4th of July and so forth in Ephraim. But Grandma didn't like the idea, so they bought a farm in Taylorsville.
Yeah. It's interesting because I just saw an article. I was looking on Salt Lake Magazine.
Yeah.
They had an article in there about what we've lost, like the historical things that stick out in our memory, and the
Yeah.
obvious ones are like Saltaire. But it's interesting that bike track was one of them,
Yeah.
because they were commenting on there's things that make places different and original and special that you can't get back.
Right. Well,
And-
in a weird way too is like I'm only 32, but I remember like for a lot of my life, I remember just reading about, you know, Saltaire, or like I
Yep.
remember
Yeah.
reading about how they used to have a lagoon over at the, out, you know, at the lake, and then
Well,
like
Saltaire was big.
yeah,
It's
yeah, I
huge.
see the
And
pictures of that.
I was never old enough to go there.
Yeah.
But during the war, my sister and brother-in-law took me out to Black Rock Beach to swim, and I had to be 4, maybe 5, and I remember walking out in the lake, and pretty quick I was up to here, and I was starting to float. Well, here came a wave, about that big, and turned me this way, and they pulled me out. And they wanted me to take a shower, but they had cold water. I didn't want that. But I remember on the way home, they stopped and bought me a hamburger in the mall. It tasted really good because it didn't need salt.
Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, I love the Saltaire. I see pictures of all, you know, all those old pictures, and it's like a weird longing for like a time that you like, it's like almost 100 years before you're alive. And
My mother told a story about Saltaire also, and she said that she and her friends went out to Saltaire to swim, but in the 1910s the sewage system was open into Saltaire,
oh wow.
and she was in the lake and this little turd floated by, and she said that was the last time she was ever going in that lake.
Different standards back then.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and when I
Yeah.
grew up, the Jordan River, all the cities just dumped the raw sewage into the Jordan River.
And then it went off to the Great Salt Lake.
So we've come full circle here about we miss the things that
Right.
we liked and the good stuff,
Right.
but we're really grateful that not all of it didn't maintain.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll take
Another
the
thing is,
architecture and some
it
of the
doesn't
buildings.
perhaps affect the theaters at all, but this area here was farms.
Yeah.
And we got Red Butte, and we got immigration and Parley Canyon water, and the people that owned the rights to the canyon, this is the farms that they brought the water to.
Yeah, yeah.
And they made an agreement with the city in
1888.
1888. They gave the city the water out of the canyons, and the city pumped water through the Salt Lake Canal for the irrigation purposes.
Wow.
And the water users have a mediator, and the city provides a water master. And if either person breaks the agreement, then the water rights for Parleys and immigration go back to the water users.
Oh, okay.
And the city's tried to break that,
Yeah. And to bring that full circle to the
and
theater.
they can't.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
To the theater, it's interesting because, so I grew up playing in irrigation water. It would come by every Friday in the summer, basically, right? We flood the yard. And it connected me to all that history, right? So like back to the farms, back to the agreement, back to the city. And to me, it like all those things. And so they could have just got rid of all that. It
Yeah.
would have been a piece of history in a book somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we're fortunate, right? We have the remnants of the history that ties us to the back, like the emotional past you were talking about, Mom, or the
Well,
theater,
the
right?
reason I bought the house was because it got irrigation water, and that sounds like a really dumb reason in today's standards. But I saw the neighbor irrigating, and I thought, man, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And
what
that's
we
why
need.
her dad moved to Rupert, because of the
Minidoka irrigation.
Minidoka irrigation, all the dams from the Snake River.
So you could farm.
Well,
But
people don't remember too. Is like there's the Depression, but then the '30s was the Dust Bowl too. It's like
Yeah.
another big part that people don't always talk about
And it-
nowadays with how
Yep.
dry and the lack of water.
And the theater survived through all of it. We always
Yeah.
we've been referencing the war, right? Like, and it's
Yeah.
not like it was going to get bombed, right? When we say the war, but it survived through all of these world events,
Right.
And it was tied to all these world events,
And the modernization of
and the
living.
modernization and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
evolution of vaudeville and theater into film, and
Yeah,
from
entertainment.
silent film with organ accompaniment to
Yeah.
movies, right? It's like it lived through all that history, and I think most people, when they understand it and they see it, they connect with
Yeah,
it.
a century is a long time.
Well,
Yeah, a century
the
is a
other
long
thing that
time.
I have no idea whose idea it was, but they took, all the theaters had to take their marquees down.
Right.
Oh yeah, the old neon signs.
Because
yeah.
they were over the sidewalk, and I think there
Well,
was
I
an
know,
issue
but I
of
mean,
safety.
they've been over the sidewalk forever.
Yeah, yeah.
They hadn't fallen yet.
Yeah, it's sad because like those old marquees are incredible. Like
Yeah.
we were talking about, like you can see like the transformation in all the periods. Like there's like the '20s marquee, then the '30s. when
Because
it was
now
like
you go down the streets and it's just
Yeah.
buildings.
Yeah.
And there's going to be this, when people come, where do they go? They go to the this is the place, they go to the Great Salt Lake, they go to Temple Square,
Yeah.
and what theaters do they go to?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a theater's a theater. You go in, they shut the lights off, you watch the movie, you walk out. But you walk into the Utah theater,
Yeah.
and it's an experience.
Just like the
Yeah,
Capitol.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's cool too is like, you know, the more we learn about the Pantages and the history of all this stuff, it's like I have a theory that you know, ours was the crown jewel of the Pantages family. Is like you know, one of the oldest. It's older than the Hollywood Pantages. It's bigger than Tacoma, you know, and when Alexander lost it, he sold it to RKO Orpheum in the early 30s. He tried to come back and buy it, specifically this one too. So I think he really had a huge fondness for this one, and it was really his like masterpiece. And so it really is like a national treasure. And one thing we've talked about that's kind of cool is like it's already a national treasure, but then like restoring it and bringing it back for new generations with Sundance and these other things, it become an international treasure at that point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but there won't be a theater like this in the world, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's easy to liken it. I consistently liken it to the Capitol, to the city and county building, and you could even liken it to our religious structures, the temple, the Hotel Utah, these things that we have that have a connection to the history of this area and the Intermountain West. Just like you know, your mom wasn't born and raised in Salt Lake, but she had a connection to it because she lived here for a while. You lived in Idaho,
right,
and people from all parts know about it.
Well, even going back to, you know, the old country, like Irish, Scottish family right here. I'm just joining your family, I guess.
We love it.
But on my side too, you know, it's like, you know, Guinness is just like almost, it's like older than America, right? Just one company in Ireland. It's like there's buildings there. They're 500 years old. There's opera houses going back to the 1400s, or you go back to, you know, look in Asia. There's like a giant Buddhist statue that's 1,000 years old. It's just like these things are wild. It's like
they're there because no one tore them down.
If we hope to America to ever have something that long, it's like
when the automobiles
save
came and people started traveling with automobiles, the first campsite in Salt Lake was just west of Dirks Field, which is now what, Smith's Ballpark?
Oh yeah.
That open lot there was where people could camp with their car, put a tent up on the old Lincoln Highway.
Wow.
There's an interesting
not even that long ago
context for another podcast with allowing people a place to camp if that's what they wish to do, and the homeless population. But we'll set that aside. I'm just saying that's what that comment brought to mind for me is, that's interesting.
Well, there's some things here that brought something to mind to me, and that is when 1909 was when the Pantages was built.
It was they started construction in 1918 and then finished in 1920.
Oh, right after the war.
First, they had an original Pantages on 3rd South.
Yep.
Yeah. He bought that. That one was originally the Colonel Theater in 1913, and then, but I think the Capitol goes back to 1908.
And it was an Orpheum Theater.
When Alden Payne built our house, it was because the big field had been opened up for subdivision.
Right.
And the non-LDS members in the valley were resentful of the Mormons having that big field to house their cattle in the winter. And so they were excited to get in there and subdivide and build. Yeah. So he was one of the people who donated for Westminster College.
Oh, okay.
And that's his brother built the gym, and that's why it's Payne Memorial Gymnasium at Westminster. So I just can't help but think there was some feeling among LDS members about having this wicked, evil Pantages theater. And then, because my mother wasn't a member, she was Presbyterian, and that kind of entertainment would have been a new thing.
Right,
Vaudeville would have been a new thing in the valley.
Well, what's really funny about that too is like we have some community members that are helping us doing some history, and we're doing some different series, and we're looking into. We have an ongoing series with some early drag performers in the 1910s, which is really interesting now because it's like people have a problem with it right now. You know,
but it was happening back
Maud
then.
Adams used to live just right over here.
Who's Maud Adams?
She was
the first Peter Pan on Broadway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, big stuff.
She was in the 10th, She was a member of the 10th Ward.
And she had performed on Broadway
Yeah.
in New York.
Yeah, these were like huge shows though. Like these
Yeah.
performers were so famous, they would go like do the whole circuit around the whole country
Yeah.
and stuff, and it's
On the
super
train.
fascinating.
Yeah, on the train, exactly.
Yeah.
That was how you got
Well,
around.
one of the things that I used to show my music students to explain that was the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy, because it shows George M. Cohan actually talks about him seeing on the train, loading up the scenery, loading up, all of the props onto the train, going to the next town, doing 2 matinees and 3
Yeah.
shows
On
at night
the vaudeville
on the
circuit.
vaudeville
But
circuit.
Yeah.
my grandpa Ty had acting companies out of Ephraim, and so they would travel to Manti and put on shows for people. Over to Wales, which is a little town just outside of Moroni, and they had a I don't know what the name of the play they were putting on, but there was a scene where a guy took a gun with a blanket in it and shot another guy.
Oh wow.
And the person that was supposed to make sure the blanket didn't have anything in it, they'd put chalk in there,
Yeah.
left the wadding in there, and when he shot it, they put the guy's eye out, and so my grandpa closed it.
He's like, I'm not doing
Oh
this
my
anymore.
We closed it down.
You mentioned Westminster and then Ephraim, so a little bit of weird family history is I think on one of my sides is one of my ancestors was founded Snow College.
Oh, nice.
Just made me think of that, but
Yeah.
I've never
Where's
been
Snow
there.
College again?
It's in Ephraim.
It's in Ephraim, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Snow College was my mother's sister Juna and Uncle Hap. Uncle Hap was from Scipio. And I asked my cousin Burke Peterson, I said, where did they meet? I said, Uncle Hap was in Scipio and Juna was in Ephraim. He says, well, Uncle Hap had gone to the 8th grade, and then, so he went to Snow Academy to get his high school education.
Yeah.
And so that's where they
That's
met.
how they cross paths.
That's funny. But yeah, I was going to mention too, on one of the, we have our theater, Facebook and Instagram. You posted one of the old photos of some of the maintenance, and
Yeah,
that was really cool. Like a lot of people got a kick out of that. It was really popular. So I was just
most of that was the fire sprinkler system.
yeah, that was so cool.
Maintenance in the theater?
Well, it was there was a pump and some pipes, but it was a fire sprinkler
Yeah.
system.
Gotcha.
Well, someone commented like last time they were in there in the '80s. They're like, it looks exactly the same still.
Yeah, well, it's
Well, that picture was old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's from like the 30s or 40s or something like that.
I thought about it
Cool.
when they talk it, like you think about it in the context. It's been, you could say it's a negative that it's been closed, right? But the
Yeah.
reality is it's a positive. It's been sitting there laying in wait,
Yeah.
not being damaged,
Yeah,
right?
kind of just kept it in the
Right,
same
waiting to be
condition.
restored. No one's been in there chipping away
Yeah.
at anything.
And in a weird way too, we kind of talked about this with some of our architect team, and and when they cut the theater in half, there's just this big giant metal,
Yeah.
Framework,
framework in there.
steel
So
beams.
in a weird way, it's probably kept it a little bit more structurally sound.
stable, yeah.
And it does, it was built with the largest Warren Truss in existence at the
Yeah.
time, which obviously has been holding very well.
Which keys it into even just an architectural history. Set aside the aesthetics of the architecture.
Yeah.
There's like all these, you keep finding as you get deeper into
Right.
that, there's all these pieces. Oh, our timer.
That will be our intermission real quick.
Right.
That's all good.
Intermission. That's a good, I like that.
Oh, shoot.
Well, what
It'll
we
be
need is
released on
we
a
need a
podcast.
tripod just for the Instagram.
Yeah,
Facebook
I
Live.
should have been over here.
What you
so.
guys reminded me, this little dissertation here was
Yeah.
something that happened one time at school. I taught band and orchestra, and you don't always do things in that area that is liked by the administration.
Yeah.
I had a vice principal or the assistant principal who would call me in and say, I need to talk to you, but you're not going to like me very much.
Yeah.
And I said, look, we have got to understand you're doing the best you can with your job, and I'm trying to do the best I can with my job,
Yeah.
and we just need to get along. And because we disagree or because we don't like what someone else does,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we don't like them.
Yeah. What's interesting for me is like it's a really simple thing here, right? So there's about 1.2 million greater people in the greater Salt Lake area right now. That's a lot of people, and obviously if we're talking about restoring the theater for decades and generations, another 50 to 100 years, that's a ton of people here. So to have all those people's lives in the future of art and creativity and be able to not enjoy the Pantages because of 7 city council members and 1 mayor, just a dozen people holding up this for all the future and millions. It seems kind of silly when you put it into that regards, and it seems a lot easier to well, we're going to just keep fighting and
but it's
do whatever we need to do.
It boils down to money, and money can't control the value of things.
Right.
Well, an example, if they hadn't restored the trolley system in San Francisco,
Right.
why? That would take half the fun out of going to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
The cable cars.
Well,
the cable cars.
Yeah, and there's we were kind of talking about this yesterday, Salt Lake City has already lost so much. There's the question is have we already lost what made Salt Lake City special, and the culture, and that emotional aspect that you talked about, and the culture versus San Francisco. It's got a real vibe to it, or New York. New York nowadays, you can't tear down anything historic. They finally realized what the value of all those things are.
Yeah.
And then especially we mentioned earlier with Europe and these other places, if we ever hope to have something 300 or 500 years old in America one day, it's we got to protect it when it's 100 years old.
You commented on the population, and our population is supposed to double by, is it 2050, 2040,
Well,
something like
when
that?
I moved to Salt Lake 50 years ago, there was only 1 million people in the whole state.
Yeah.
And now there's more than that in just Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Just the valley here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I found doing a lot of research into this. The U did a study a few years ago about population projections that go up to 2065, and it mentions 2025, and our 2019 population already is pretty much surpassed
those estimates.
that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even take account in COVID and all the people coming from California now the last year.
But then we're going to get back to we need the housing.
Yeah.
We're going to go back,
That's
Yeah.
a constant. That's always been a battle.
But,
the housing part.
that you can't destroy
Right.
things of value
Yeah.
to build things that you need right now.
Right.
And I want to know what they're going to do with the Sears block.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big question.
I don't like the way they frame this either, where it's housing versus art and culture. It's we need both, right? People need to survive. They need food. They need housing, but they also need, art and emotional and cultural, artistic things. They go hand in hand. We need to do both. There's not one or the other. So
Yeah.
I kind of don't like that versus.
Yeah.
It's we can build housing and save the theater, and we should be doing both.
Yeah.
Back when I was a kid, there were a lot of theaters, and there was a lot of people in the movie industry. There was a place called the Film Club,
Yeah.
and the Pagoda restaurant on East Street, just above South Temple, was the Film Club. And for Christmas, we'd go there, and Santa would give us one of those mesh, like an onion sack thing, only it was shaped like a stocking with candy and oranges and stuff in it. And that's one of the movies, or the things that I remember as a kid.
So would they get tickets to the films and stuff, like a movie pass? Because you said it was the film club, or was it just the place?
No, that was a club for all the salesmen,
Oh, for the movie reps
secretaries,
and stuff.
and everybody that worked in the film industry.
Like
That's
you'd
awesome.
have in New York or LA, you'd have the press club, or
Yeah.
yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
So I saw a lot of movies during the war. I saw all the newsreels, and I saw the atrocities and things that went on. And
Yeah.
when we first started fighting in Afghanistan, and Dan Rather was over there with the camera and so forth. It was like that. His was real time. Mine was filmed and then brought.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it
amazing.
gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, even the way they did things back then, we talk about the newsreels in the cinema, right? People would go see the cinema, but they'd have cartoons.
But they'd go to get the
do-
news.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they'd have cartoons for the kids. They'd have the Nickelodeons, they'd call them, and different things like that.
And then there
So
was
you'd
the
see all these
cereal,
different-
so that
yeah,
you'd
the
come back
cereals.
next week.
Yeah.
It's like everything there, TV. It was
Yep.
all
It was
For
the
my
entertainment.
8th birthday, Dad was working for RKO, and the movie Song of the South had just come out.
Yeah.
And so for my birthday party, he brought home 16 millimeter color Song of the South, and
Like a private
RKO
screening.
represented
Right.
Buena Vista, which was Disney, and
Yeah.
also 6 cartoons. And so I was real popular there for a week or two.
Well, it's funny too. Is I always love Martin Scorsese and some of the directors, and some of the older directors they talk about is when it came out in Technicolor.
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
like
The next
Well,
thing,
right,
the
the
next
next-
evolution
yeah,
of film,
the
right?
The Villa Theater's another one we've lost.
yeah.
They did the premiere of How the West Was Won there in Salt Lake. And my dad had a free ticket, so I went with him. and it was CinemaScope where they had the 3 projectors,
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
and the screen was curved, and we sat in the front row, extreme left. and when that train car at the end, with the last thing where Eli Wallach and
Yeah.
and the guy that was the sheriff, I can't remember, think of his name right now, but they were fighting and crashed and everything. Man, it was.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
That's so cool. What's cool too, you brought up westerns, is there's something I always like to mention when talking about the theater and restoring it from a film background, is like people don't realize, you know, they always hear about New York and California, right, for film history, but Utah has such incredible history with westerns and John Ford and Monument Valley and all these movies that were filmed here, and you know, it ties in directly with Robert Redford and Sundance and all these
Jeremiah
things.
Johnson.
And like you know, westerns are one of the typical American genres. You know, it's like, so worldwide cinema history would be completely different without Utah. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, another thing, the exhibitor or the man that owned the theater, one of the theaters in Ogden, I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
He eventually became the head of Paramount Pictures. And Mount Ben Lomond was the model for the Paramount Mountain in their logo.
Okay.
If you didn't, I don't know if you knew that or not.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't know if I did. That's incredible.
Yeah, I'm just remembering all sorts of movie bits. So there's a house up Immigration Canyon.
Yeah.
If I remember the story correctly, there's a gate. And the gate to that house, what was it called? Anyway, it's a gate that used to be at Paramount.
Yeah.
Or one of the studios,
That's
and
amazing.
they salvaged it and brought it here, and it's up there because they had replaced the gate. There's
Yeah.
all these. Utah has an unusual history connection to theater.
Well,
and film.
the entire Wild West happened in Monument
Yeah.
Valley.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's I saw this quote that said like that 5 square miles in Monument Valley is what, you know, the whole world thinks of when they think of the American West.
American West, yeah.
But and this morning too, I just posted something about the Sandlot. It was like, you know, it always comes up.
And
with
that
the-
was just filmed down.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Sandlot.
It's
And
like one
people
of the-
love that
Yeah,
movie.
it's like one of the best baseball movies of all
Yeah.
time. But I think we got about maybe 5 or 7 minutes left.
Yeah.
So-
Well, so speaking of the Sandlot,
Yeah.
we'll let everyone know when tickets go on sale for the showing of that at the Utah
that's
Pantages
like
Theater.
there's certain movies like that, The Sandlot,
Yeah.
like certain just really Utah movies, like
Yeah.
those would be great to just show every year and just for the whole community to come out and.
What's the one,
I'd
the
be sold
Christmas
out.
one with the lamp that's made out of a leg?
Oh,
yeah,
Christmas Story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that connected?
Wasn't that filmed?
No, I don't know if it was filmed here, but
Oh yeah.
He just loves it.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Oh, you hated it?
I like it. He does not like it. I have to watch that one alone.
I would love to watch all those westerns.
Well,
and,
I'd
Right.
like
In the
to
theater.
see how the West was won and is Paris burning in the
Yeah.
the big format.
A few years ago, it was the 50th anniversary of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and I was like, how cool it would have been to have
Yep.
the Pantages restored. We show that, have Robert Redford, people come out and do a Q&A. just
Butch
celebrate
Cassidy,
the
that was
movie.
shot over in part of it in Durango.
Right, and that's like the movie he came out here, and that's what, you know, he fell in love with Utah, and that's why he made Sundance.
And then
brought
Jeremiah
Sundance here.
Johnson, that was his first Utah film, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was filmed back
Yeah.
behind Mount Templeton.
And
That's
then-
one of my favorite
Yeah,
movies,
yeah.
Jeremiah
Yeah.
Johnson.
So you were saying we're kind of wrapping it up?
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes left, I
All right.
think, so any last...
Any last thoughts?
Well, I just, you know, to restore the Pantages would be just a feather in the cap of Salt Lake. I mean,
Yeah.
when people came that after they went to Temple Square, they'd probably say, "Hey, let's go see if we can see the Pantages," because it's just an amazing theater. And I don't know how many times I went to a movie there, but a lot. I remember riding the bus from Murray. We'd hitchhike over to Murray, and nickel would get you the bus ride, and we go to the Lyric Theater, which was also pretty fancy, and we'd watch a couple of serials, Superman, Buck Rogers, and then a short, and then a full-length movie, and then a cartoon or two, and then they'd have a spelling bee after, where you'd go
So
up and if you did it right, you'd win prizes. I remember winning something one time, but,
awesome.
but those are experiences of that time because there was no television. And
Well, I remember when the PTA used to sponsor movies down here at the Tower Theater
Yeah.
for the kids. They sold the tickets at school, and then during the summer, every week they'd have a movie down at the Tower, and the kids could go
Yeah.
down and
but
watch it.
if you look at the tower now and look how it was when it was originally built,
It had towers on both sides.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
mean it was I don't
well,
know
we're
why
seeing the
they
picture.
changed it.
Yeah, that's
but
cool.
It was a
I like
reflection
lot.
of the evolution of theater, because that's what
Yeah.
happened to the Pantages. That
Yeah.
that front on the Pantages you see
Yeah.
now is the same era as the front on the tower. And as the movie industry changes, that's how they were reacting to.
But I remember,
People.
the studio theater, the Rialto Theater on the east side of Main
Yep,
Street.
we've seen pictures of that one.
What's
The
cool-
Uptown Theater.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just trying to.
What's cool about doing this too, as I always like to mention, is like the vast majority of people that message us on Facebook or social media, they're over 60 years old. They have a personal connection to the Pantages.
And I'm sure even the
they're-
younger kids have stories that their parents or grandparents have told them about,
Yeah.
like Carol's mom going to the Pantages.
Yeah, yeah. It's so incredible. And like I feel like that's really the missed opportunity with the city here trying to destroy this. Is like, it's not our legacy. We're just younger generation. It's really
Well, there are current
older
stories
generations.
about the Capitol Theater, people going there and noticing and looking, and that emotional thing that they're feeling being in there, that could be the same at the Pantages.
Yeah, yeah.
They just haven't had the opportunity.
It's just been closed forever.
What's
so.
the name of the? It's like a theater, but the place is on the U Circle that we went and saw.
Oh,
Carol
Pioneer
Channing?
Theater?
No,
Pioneer. Oh, Kingsbury Hall.
Kingsbury
Kingsbury
Hall.
Hall,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there's lots of history there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, should we, for people that listen to this, watch this, go to Facebook,
Right.
um,
Save the Utah Pantages.
Pantages, go to Instagram, Save the Utah Pantages.
Yeah, our website, savetheutahpantages.org.
Yeah.
We're finally getting them memorized here
I know, right?
after the 90s.
Go to change.org and search
Yeah.
up Save the Utah Theater. We're trying to update that.
Yeah. This will also be, we've filmed this, so this will be put out like a normal podcast on the audio platforms, and then this will also be on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. We tried to live stream it. I'm not sure if it went super great this first
Yeah.
time, but we'll
We'll get
try
better.
again next time and try to,
We
live
just,
stream
there were
these.
no lies. I told the truth.
live stream. So yeah, it's been great.
Well, I enjoyed the one you live streamed when you went around the.
Oh,
The
good.
tour. Yeah, we need to just
We
do,
saw you pop on there.
We need to like do a whole recording.
Oh, could
of
you
that.
see me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can see when people, so I'm like,
Oh.
oh, look, there's my dad.
Yeah, we kind of shouted you out. So.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, there's Casey, your dad's on. So.
We're learning how it works with live streams. You're
Yeah.
supposed to, let people know we see
You
you.
need a steady cam.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
that would be cool.
Yeah, I need to get a better holder thing, and
Yeah.
I think that like a tour around the building, and hopefully inside the building soon.
Yes.
Once we get access, is
Yeah.
that'd be super fun to just do a whole recording of that, put on YouTube so people can see.
I'd like to see us get some big hitters to get on board, like Reagans and Eccles and.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Huntsman
in
and-
some conversations with some people.
With lots of people.
Yeah, with lots of people. But I think, every day there's more support, more momentum of this. We were talking about, we have a petition online. It was just a few weeks ago. It's at 5,000. Like within 12 days, it was like
did
almost
you?
7,000.
Jenny mentioned a company that does grants, and I sent it to you.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because, I'm biased. These are my parents, right? We have our stories. I would end by saying we come across people all the time who have similar histories and similar recollections and memories and connections. And the more we do this and the more in depth we get into it, those people are coming out of the woodwork. They're on every at every turn. There's people that have a connection to the Pantages Theater.
Yeah.
So
I think we're, I like to say, like, we're almost 95% of the way there. Like, we just need the building, we have the team, we have
Yeah.
what we're trying to do here, and I think we're going to do it for sure. So,
Oh.
thanks so much for listening,
Yeah.
and it's been a pleasure. This is
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
all right,
Glad you came.
we're off.